If the art of not giving a shit was a wrestling character, CM Punk is probably what you would see. He's become one of the most polarizing figures in the entire wrestling business. Some people love him, some people hate him, but you can't deny the career that he's had up until this point. Everywhere he's been a top star. Semantics, politics aside, he's done it. The dude simply wore his heart on his sleeve for his entire wrestling career. But how did CM Punk become one of the hottest things in pro wrestling? This is the rise of the best in the world, CM Punk. Before touring the world, CM Punk started his career as a backyard wrestler, performing alongside his buddies and his brother in the LWF, or Lunatic Wrestling Federation, pretty close to his hometown of Chicago. It was during this time where CM Punk got his name because he was in a tag team called the Chick Magnets, where the CM stemmed from. That obviously makes sense. Name and all, CM Punk got a bigger itch for pro wrestling. He didn't want to spend his time wrestling in the backyard, but he wanted to do it on a professional level, so he decided to go get some training at Steel Domain Wrestling, where he was trained by Ace Steel, Danny Dominion, and Kevin Quinn. Basically, here it said that CM Punk genuinely wanted to do this, unlike his friends who just did it for fun. His official pro wrestling debut came at age 20 in 1999 in Minnesota, and it was during this time where he found his home promotion of IWA Mid-South, where he mixed things up with people like Eddie Guerrero, Rey Mysterio, and AJ Styles. Wrestling those guys, mixed with Punk's ability to put on classic matches with basically anyone, it made him a very hot commodity in the indie circuit. Punk was on the rise, which led him to different promotions, one of which was TNA. Here he would spend time in Raven's flock before ultimately turning on him and leaving TNA, because while working for TNA, Punk was also with Ring of Honor, which TNA didn't want their wrestlers to work for because of what happened in the Rob Feinstein controversy. Pause it here if you want to read what happened. But this was a blessing in disguise for CM Punk. Now he was in Ring of Honor full stop, and he quickly found success winning Tag Team Gold, and from here he had some high profile matches with guys like AJ Styles. The thing with Punk was his straight edge character just worked. When he was feuding with Raven, he and Raven were perfect as both just juxtaposed each other's characters to a perfect T. And the fans loved that. CM Punk voiced his displeasure towards drugs and alcohol. This came from Punk's past as his dad was an alcoholic, so he saw this and basically rebelled against everything he saw. The anti-hero character worked perfectly for him, and this helped him gain a huge following on the indies. In ROH, Punk and Samoa Joe were putting on some barn burner matches, which started to catch a lot of people's attention. The first two ended in 60-minute draws, and the second of those matches earned a 5-star rating in the process, the first wrestling match in North America to get that rating in 7 years. It was during this time that CM Punk caught WWE's eye in 2005, and he was later signed to the company. Surprisingly enough, Vince McMahon didn't Vince McMahon his name and call him Pepsi Punk or anything like that. He let him keep his indie name when he arrived to the WWE. ROH fans knew that CM Punk had been offered a WWE contract, but shockingly enough, he won the ROH World title, and then he went commando heel, telling fans that they were all delusional. He said he'd quit the company and he'd take the title with him. The dude even signed his WWE contract on the Ring of Honor title. This man was making a Ring of Honor storyline one of the biggest in pro wrestling. ROH just had this buzz around it. People were talking about CM Punk's ability to be a phenomenal character, but also with that came the mystique of, is he gonna take the title to WWE? Would he actually take it there? Would he lose it? What was going on? In that summer of 2005, he had title defenses against Jay Lethal, Christopher Daniels, and Roderick Strong before he eventually lost the title to Jamie Noble. There was a legit belief that CM Punk was going to appear on WWE with the ROH title, but that never happened. He lost it, and the first summer of Punk was officially over. It was time for the Second City Savior to begin his WWE career. When CM Punk left ROH, he went to OVW, the same place that churned out names like John Cena, Brock Lesnar, Randy Orton, and Batista. Here he competed against wrestlers like Kenny Dykstra, Mr. Kennedy, and The Miz. Obviously not the most elite crop in OVW history, but hey, he needed to go there to become somewhat molded into WWE's vision. From here, he would become the OVW TV champion before winning the company's world championship. CM Punk later made his debut in the WWE ECW debut, the one with Durag Vince. Here we got introduced to what CM Punk was all about. He didn't do drugs, he didn't smoke, he didn't party. He was just a pro wrestler through and through. With him, he brought in all those fans who were buzzing about the Ring of Honor Summer of Punk. People just gravitated towards him because he just had this natural vibe to him. He had tremendous in-ring ability, his gimmick actually stood out, and he was just easy to get behind even if he was being a heel. He was that good. In 2006, CM Punk was in John Cena's WrestleMania 22 entrance. Ironically enough, he'd be the one giving the WWE Universe the ride of their life in a storyline with John Cena just a few years later. In that same year, he teamed up with DX and the Hardy Boys to win his first big WWE match. And then Punk continued his time in ECW, going on a winning streak which eventually ended in early 2007. Also in 07, CM Punk would find himself making his WrestleMania debut in the Money in the Bank ladder match. But this wasn't his year. His year, or multiple years, were still somewhere down the line. Eventually, the ECW champion, which was Bobby Lashley, was drafted over to Raw, so a tournament was held to crown the new ECW champion. In the finals of that tournament was CM Punk taking on Chris Benoit. But Benoit never made the event because most of us know what happened, and he was later replaced by Johnny Nitro, who went on to win the ECW championship. For the following 3 months or so, he was chasing the ECW title before eventually beating John Morrison and reigning for 143 days, but Punk eventually lost that title to Chavo Guerrero. At WrestleMania 24, CM Punk was in the Money in the Bank ladder match, but Punk was still in ECW. CM Punk went on to win the Money in the Bank ladder match, and he earned himself a world title match at any time he chose fit. There it was. It looked like CM Punk had the backing of higher ups in WWE. At a time where Money in the Bank actually meant something for stars, and it helped them reach the next level of their career. Even though the talk was that people like Vince McMahon really didn't see much in CM Punk. But there he was, the new Mr. Money in the Bank in 2008. 3 months later, CM Punk was drafted to Raw from ECW, the same night that Vince fell into the stage. Good times. And just 1 week after making his way over to Raw, CM Punk cashed in his Money in the Bank on the World Heavyweight Champion, that being Edge. Shout out to Batista. And there it was. CM Punk was now the World Heavyweight Champion. He hadn't won any secondary titles, he hadn't even been on Raw or SmackDown that long, but they gave it to him. This wasn't anything we foresaw. He was on the brink of being released in 2006, and as much as I hate to say it, there was still that stigma around indie wrestlers during this time. The whole premise of his first title reign was that he was out to prove the doubters wrong. Everyone thought it was a fluke, and WWE didn't do Punk much favors. Even as world champion, he took back seats to guys like Cena, Batista, Undertaker, and Edge, simply because their stories were more interesting, and WWE didn't put much behind CM Punk. Obviously, this was originally supposed to be Jeff Hardy's cash-in, but Jeff Hardy pulled the Jeff Hardy, so CM Punk got it instead, so you could kind of tell that they weren't fully invested. In his first world title reign, he was written off in storyline and lost it without much direction. And it's a theme you'll notice in CM Punk's title reigns is that there's always something else happening, or he just isn't given the green light by management. The following year at WrestleMania, CM Punk won the Money in the Bank for the second consecutive year, and this time he cashed in on Jeff Hardy for his second World Heavyweight Championship. Jeff Hardy and CM Punk, they had an amazing feud, which was so personal. You had CM Punk, who was straight edge, and then Jeff Hardy, who let his personal demons get to him. It was the perfect storm. It was during this title reign where Punk was presented a lot better. He was made to look like a maniacal sicko heel who just simply believed that his way was the right way. The feud ended in a loser leaves WWE match where CM Punk came out on top. He even mocked Jeff Hardy coming out on SmackDown dressed as Jeff. The momentum was trending upwards until The Undertaker popped up. No more world title, but Punk was still better than you. How did he want to prove this? By forming the Straight Edge Society, a group where people could let go of their past and instead believe CM Punk's gospel truths. During this time, he had a personal feud with Rey Mysterio, which went on through the early part of 2010, and it eventually led to CM Punk getting his head shaped bald. This looks funny, man. It was around this time where CM Punk was in a weird state of flux with his character. Yeah, he had world title reigns and he was an amazing talent, but he was directionless after the Straight Edge Society came to an end. I don't know why, but CM Punk singing to Aaliyah still haunts me to this day. For the last few months of 2010, CM Punk did commentary on Raw because he had an injured hip. He was fun to listen to because the dude's just entertaining, but the thing is, he's a better wrestler in the ring. Near the end of 2010, it was a chair shot to John Cena that would set up the newest leader of the Nexus, that being CM Punk. The thing here was that Nexus just lost all their steam at this point. As good as CM Punk was, handing the group over to him and trying to give it a revamp just didn't work. They were trying to save a sinking ship with what that group was at the time. Punk feuded with Randy Orton leading up to WrestleMania 27, and after that, the Nexus slowly disbanded without a large falling out or big angle. But for Punk, the best was yet to come. In June of 2011, CM Punk revealed that his WWE contract was expiring, and this was true. His contract was used as a storyline element, but man, we did not expect what this ended up being. Punk was tired of the backstage politics. He felt like he wasn't really going anywhere at that point, and it made sense. They had gone up and down with him, but never fully the green light. So in an effort to have Punk re-sign, WWE made this real life aspect into a storyline. Who better to have on the opposite end than the biggest star in the company, that being John Cena. It was during this time that CM Punk cut the pipe bomb, basically going on a tirade against WWE, calling Vince McMahon a bully, saying WWE would be better after Vince died, mocking Vince's family, mentioning other promotions. It had the entire wrestling world talking again. The product, which felt so PG and diluted, so scripted, finally had a little bit of edge back into it, and CM Punk was the one who brought that edge back. It's a promo that people still debate whether it was scripted or not, but come on, I doubt Vince would give someone free reins and just let them bash his own company on his own television show. The feud picked up more and more momentum, and what made it even better was that the climax was going to be in CM Punk's hometown of Chicago. Over the coming weeks, we had contract signings, suspension, stipulations, all to make the match feel even bigger. And it just made Punk feel even bigger too. He felt like one of, if not the biggest star in the industry at that time. The buzz was through the roof. Then came July 17th, 2011. Money in the Bank. Cena versus Punk in the main event. If CM Punk won, John Cena would be fired. And if CM Punk won, that was it. He wasn't re-signed to WWE. He was taking the most prestigious title in the company with him wherever he went. Near the end of the match, Laurinaitis and McMahon try to redo the screwjob finish, but Punk takes the win and the WWE Championship with him. He blew Vince a kiss goodbye and he was gone from the WWE. When that clock was striking midnight, his contract was over. WWE was left without a WWE champion, but Rey Mysterio won the new WWE title, only for Cena to win it back at the end of the night. Instead of having Punk go away for a large amount of time, Punk was brought back very quickly and we had a title unification match at SummerSlam 2011, which Punk won. Then instead of moving forward with Punk, he was screwed over again because WWE decided to put the title on Alberto Del Rio and derail all of CM Punk's momentum. That's how many times I've said that now. Then he got stuck in a feud about text messages and clicks with Kevin Nash. Then he lost to Triple H at the following month's Night of Champions. The whole situation was a complete mess. And Punk was once again cast aside, even though he was the guy who was killing it. It was his time. He should have just been set to go. But WWE decided to make things even more convoluted. He regained the world title a few months later, but at that point, he just wasn't as hot as he was in August of 2011. From here, CM Punk went on a 434-day WWE Championship reign. During this reign, he had amazing matches with guys like Chris Jericho, Daniel Bryan, and of course, John Cena. I've already covered the 434-day reign in full on this channel, so if you want a full in-depth look at that reign, go check that video out. But the consensus coming out of that reign was that WWE never said, here, go be the guy. When you parallel this with a lot of monstrous title reigns, you can see that CM Punk just took a backseat to other things that were happening, mainly John Cena. He main evented a handful of pay-per-views in that stretch, most of which did involve John Cena. One more thing was that CM Punk was outselling Cena in merchandise, and there were some talks that Punk would be the top face and Cena would transition into being a mega heel. The thing with this reign was that CM Punk just understood when it was time to change things up. He turned heel in the middle of this reign, aligning with Paul Heyman and showing that he just understood when things need to change. Even though it was Vince's call because The Rock wanted to work a heel, he ended up losing this title at the 2013 Royal Rumble. Here's where WWE wanted to go with Cena Rock 2 at WrestleMania 29. CM Punk had done the best character work of his career in the span of 2009 to 2013. It was during this time where things started to really deteriorate in 2013. According to CM Punk, many of his ideas, many of his plans were all completely shot down. The Shield was CM Punk's idea, but instead of having Chris Hero in the group, they replaced him with Roman Reigns. And according to Punk, they basically started to take his ideas and present them as their own, they being Triple H and Vince McMahon, who, as I mentioned earlier, CM Punk didn't have the greatest of relationships with. Punk was furious that he dropped the title to The Rock, and he's later even said, and I quote, "Explain to me how losing to a 45-year-old man that wrestles once a year will make me the hottest heel in the world." Punk insisted that the match at WrestleMania should have been a triple threat match because he was the one defending his title. He was the one that made wrestling fun, and he was the one busting his ass for the company. And I mean, he wasn't wrong. The idea was instead shot down, and WWE decided to run with Cena Rock 2 and have Punk face The Undertaker. And in that match, Punk said it himself. He was wrestling with a chip on his shoulder, and later on he was told by Vince that, yeah, you should have main evented. That was the best match on the show. CM Punk tore his knee. He had a strained ACL, torn MCL, torn meniscus and all. Punk needed time off, and he let that be known that he wasn't able to compete. He was fed up with the people screwing him over and over again and not caring for his injuries. But he came back, and Paul Heyman turned on CM Punk, leading to Lesnar versus Punk at SummerSlam 2013. We gotta go back to a story Punk has told, and that is that he was told he's gonna be in this match, but again, thoughts were running through his mind. Why? Why was he in this match? He puts over The Rock, Rock leaves. He puts over Undertaker, Undertaker leaves. Well, at SummerSlam 2013, Brock Lesnar in a barn burner of a match beat CM Punk, and he also left. This led to even more frustration at this point. It was basically like, alright, now you're using me as your whipping boy. You already screwed me after my title reign. You don't actually care about me. The same dude who was your world champion months ago, his stock was continually going down. Punk went, alright, it. I'm gonna do so good that they cannot deny me my WrestleMania main event the following year, because Punk wanted his main event for 3 years at this point. So the 2014 Royal Rumble rolls around, and in that match, Punk gets a concussion. He motions over to the doctor, and the ref knows, so he's thrown out by King. Goes to Vince, has a conversation with him, and he tells him, this is off screen by the way, he says he doesn't love this anymore, he says he's hurt, he says he's just tired of it. He didn't want to do what Vince said. And in 2011, when CM Punk was re-signed, he thought that Vince McMahon would have made him what he thought he was supposed to be, and in Punk's mind, that was a megastar. He didn't even want to win the main event, he just wanted the exposure with someone on his level so that he could be an asset to the company and draw. Punk has said it himself. He wanted to make the product better. On the day of his wedding with AJ Lee, he was fired. He received termination papers in the mail, and that was it. So according to Punk, he didn't quit. He was fired, and then the company went on to say that he quit. After Punk's departure, the WWE crowds would viciously shout his name out. They loved this dude. After he wasn't a part of WWE, the speculation was crazy. Why did he leave? What happened? Was he gonna come back? And that's when the podcast and the rumors continued to grow. The concussion, Vince's inability to keep Punk happy, it had all reached a boiling point. CM Punk being away, he decided to embark on an MMA career. He'd always wanted to do this even while he was wrestling. He turned towards UFC and he was met with a mixed response, and he had a pretty heated interview with Michael Landsberg. I promise not all of us Canadians are like this. Then he went to the UFC and he had 2 fights. One he lost in 2016 to Mickey Gall, and in 2018 he lost to Mike Jackson. Then he retired from the MMA and he went back into a hobby of his, which was comic books. With that, he did some acting too. He remained relatively quiet in the wrestling scene, and it had become pretty clear to wrestling fans who had done their research as to why he wasn't coming back to the WWE, but fans still kept hope. They clung onto that hope so very badly. In a weird way, he did return to wrestling on WWE Backstage, but he was contracted by Fox TV, not by the WWE. When he left that show, there was a young company on the rise, a company which fit all of what CM Punk wanted. They let characters have freedom and control, they let people develop and put on some great stories. That company was All Elite Wrestling. And then, in the summer of 2021, rumors started to go crazy. CM Punk would possibly be coming back to pro wrestling, but it would be in AEW. Then August 20th, 2021 rolls around, and after 7 years away from pro wrestling, he was back in his hometown of Chicago to one of the biggest reactions in wrestling history. The best in the world was back, and the wrestling world rejoiced. And that brings us to today. He's in AEW and he's killing it. The matches in AEW are countless. There's so many stories to tell. But I think the one crucial difference is that there's nothing for CM Punk to rebel against in AEW. That's always been his thing. I'll let you guys discuss that in the comments, but I feel like that's one crucial difference of him going to AEW. But man, what a story CM Punk has had. He's a guy who wasn't supposed to get as big as he did. He followed his dream, he didn't take no for an answer, and he won his way into the heart of millions. He's easily one of the greats of the industry, and in years previous, the current, and the future, he's going to continue to write chapters in this brilliant story and further prove to everyone why he is the best in the world.